You're listening to Audiology. Support this channel by becoming a member and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. In the summer of 1793, France was a nation on edge, with leading politicians scrambling to address the chaos caused by widespread civil unrest and threats of counter-revolution. It was a time when Bertrand Barrère, in a moment of urgency, stood up in the convention on September 5th and declared, "Let's make terror the order of the day." While this statement might sound like the kickoff to a notorious period known as the System of Terror, historians today believe that's not quite the case. Despite the push from some of its radical members and the fiery sans-culottes, the convention took a different path. They did set up a revolutionary army but stopped short of adopting terror as their official policy. French historian Jean-Clément Martin points out that the convention did not in fact establish a system of terror between 1793 and 1794. Instead, the leaders aimed to control the violent outbreaks, such as the September massacres of 1792, by taking law enforcement into their own hands, striving to govern through controlled force rather than chaos. Even Jacques Cazot, a monarchist who eerily forecasted the reign of terror, found himself a victim of the guillotine by the month's end. Maximilien Robespierre, one of the revolution's most complex figures, had his own take on terror. To him, it was a form of exceptional justice needed to keep the Republic's enemies at bay. In February 1794, he passionately defended the use of terror as necessary under the revolutionary government's extreme conditions. He argued that a government grounded in virtue and, when under threat, reinforced by terror, was the essence of democracy at its most critical juncture. Terror is nothing more than speedy, severe, and inflexible justice. It is thus an emanation of virtue, he said, framing it as a form of justice rather than a policy of fear. Albert Mathiez, a Marxist historian, supports the notion that this terror was a logical response to the dire situation at the time. Others, however, see more layers to it, pointing to ideological and emotional factors as well. The Enlightenment was a period when thinkers began to give priority to reason, questioning the basic foundations upon which society was built. This era provided new viewpoints on the functionality of governments, significantly influencing the leaders who directed the reign of terror during the French Revolution. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, in his work titled Social Contract, introduced the idea that individuals are born with inherent rights and that they establish governments to safeguard these rights. Rousseau argued that the responsibility of the government is to represent the general will, which entails looking out for the collective interests of everyone, rather than just specific groups. This concept inspired Maximilien Robespierre's vision for a French republic that manifested the general will, under the stipulation that those opposed to this idea were eliminated. He categorized those who opposed the government as tyrants, hindering the virtue and integrity of the general will. The leaders believed that to maintain the dignity of the republic, which originated from the revolution, it was necessary to fight against threats both inside and outside France's borders, employing terror as their tactic. Baron de Montesquieu, another significant Enlightenment figure, also influenced Robespierre. In Spirit of the Laws, Montesquieu put forth the idea that virtue, specifically the love for law and country, is vital for democracy. In a speech to the National Convention on the 5th of February, 1794, Robespierre echoed Montesquieu's sentiments, stating that virtue is essential for democratic governance. He expressed sorrow that the French were missing this essential virtue and embarked on a mission to eliminate those he deemed incapable of embodying it, leading to a relentless period of terror. This approach was defended as a means to crush the enemies of the revolution. Let the laws be executed and let liberty be saved, as the convention tried to justify their actions. When the French Revolution started, the other monarchies surrounding France were not too troubled by it at first. Louis XVI, however, managed to get support from his wife's brother, Leopold II of Austria, and Frederick William II of Prussia. On August 27, 1791, these allies issued the Pillnitz Declaration, vowing to bring back the French monarch if other European leaders would join them. France saw this as foreign meddling and declared war on Austria and Prussia on April 20, 1792. Initially, France faced a string of defeats, causing widespread fear of an invasion among French people. The French military went through massive reforms, which eventually paid off, but initially led to challenges like having inexperienced troops and commanders whose loyalty was uncertain. During the early part of the war, France did not fare well in battles, and the threat of the Austro-Prussian forces marching towards Paris loomed large. These early setbacks, along with internal unrest and protest, forced the French government to take drastic steps to ensure people were not just loyal to France, but to the revolution itself. France's fortunes in the war did not start to change until September 1792, with a key victory at Valmy that stopped the Austro-Prussian invasion. By the time the Reign of Terror started, the French military had found its footing and was winning battles. The ongoing war justified the government's heavy-handed tactics. The real turning point came after Louis XVI's execution and when France took over the Rhineland. This move alarmed other monarchies enough to form the first coalition against France, including Russia, Austria, Prussia, Spain, Holland, and Sardinia, launching attacks from all fronts. The constant threats and the early phase of the revolution made unifying the country a top priority for the French government. As the Reign of Terror began, leaders found that using terror, at first an improvised response to defeat once organized, became an instrument of victory. As Albert Sobel eloquently summarized, terror, at first an improvised response to defeat, once organized, became an instrument of victory. The fear of defeat and foreign threats initially motivated the use of terror, but as France started winning, it only reinforced the government's reliance on such measures. During the Reign of Terror, the pressure from groups like the Sans-Culottes and the Hébertists really shook things up for France's National Convention delegates, making the country's situation quite unstable. The National Convention itself found itself caught in a tug-of-war between two major factions. On one side were the Girondins, who leaned towards conservatism in their approach to leadership. On the other, the Montagnards, who were not shy about using radical tactics and supported the demands of the lower-class individuals. When the Montagnards gained control of the National Convention, they did not waste time in pushing for aggressive reforms. Speaking of the sans-culottes, these were essentially the working-class citizens of urban France. They were not just sitting back. Instead, they actively sought to influence leaders into taking harsh actions against anyone perceived to be against the interests of the poor. Through vibrant demonstrations and relentless pressure, they made their demands loud and clear, essentially forcing the Montagnards to consider and enact changes. This group of urban workers did not stop at demonstrations. They increased the revolution's tension by sending letters and petitions to the Committee of Public Safety. They were all about ensuring their interests and rights were a priority, pushing for policies such as food taxation that would benefit workers more than the wealthy. They even went as far as calling for the arrest of those whom they believed were against their reform efforts or possessed privileges they saw as unfair. Some of the more radical voices among them did not shy away from advocating for looting as a means to even the playing field. This whirlwind of instability and pressure from various groups significantly complicated the already daunting task of establishing a new republic and securing widespread political support. The Reign of Terror marked a significant shift away from centuries-old religious traditions and the strong influence of the aristocracy and clergy on French society. It was a time when the principles of rational thought and science began to replace religious doctrines that had long provided stability for the French people. The revolutionaries, eager for a broad cultural change, aimed to purify the French state of Christian influences. This effort started with the overthrow of the monarchy, an act that removed the state's divine legitimacy, previously granted by clergy belief in the divine right, and signaled an age of enlightenment and reason. The Catholic Church, which had possessed considerable rights and powers, saw its lands seized and its priests persecuted or exiled from France beginning in the year 1789. By the year 1792, those priests who resisted the new order, referred to as refractory priests, were replaced with secular officials allied with the radical Jacobin Club. However, not all religious groups were subjected to such hostility. For instance, the Jewish community was granted French citizenship in the year 1791. A noteworthy event during this era was the transformation of the Notre Dame Cathedral into the Temple of Reason during the Festival of Reason, alongside the introduction of a revolutionary calendar to take the place of the traditional one. Despite the drive for de-Christianization, the movement encountered resistance from a significant portion of the population who remained devout Catholics. Leaders like Robespierre sought to navigate these turbulent waters by leveraging events like the Festival of Reason to combat what he perceived as a moral counter-revolution and to restrain what he described as the monster of atheism, emerging from this radical push for secularization. This delicate balance between achieving revolutionary dreams and managing the backlash from a still religious society highlighted the use of terror as a strategy deemed justifiable to eliminate the old-world religiosity that was seen as blocking the revolutionary path. On March 10, 1793, the National Convention set the stage for drastic changes by creating the Revolutionary Tribunal. Initially, about half of the people tried by this tribunal were let go. But after the law of 22nd Prairial was enacted on June 10, 1794, the acquittal rate dropped to around 1 in 4. That March also saw the start of a rebellion in Vendée as a direct result of mass conscription, spiraling into a civil war that some say lasted even beyond the terror. By April 6, 1793, the Committee of Public Safety was established, and it quickly turned into the leading force of France during wartime, overseeing what we now call the Reign of Terror. It was a grim time. During the Reign of Terror, at least 300,000 suspects were arrested, 17,000 were officially executed, and perhaps 10,000 died in prison or without trial, indicating the severe measures taken. On June 2, 1793, a significant event occurred when the Parisian working-class rebels, known as sans-culottes, essentially laid siege to the National Convention. They demanded radical changes, including purges of the administration and political hierarchy, a cap on bread prices, and voting rights limited strictly to themselves. Their demonstration led to the arrest of 29 leaders from the Girondist faction. This, in turn, ignited the Federalist revolts in some 13 departments against the Paris-based National Convention, revolts which were eventually defeated. Interestingly, on June 24, 1793, the Convention passed the first Republican Constitution of France, known as the French Constitution of 1793, which the public approved through a referendum. However, it was never implemented. The political landscape shifted significantly after the assassination of the Jacobin leader Jean-Paul Marat on July 13, 1793, which escalated the Jacobin hold on power. That same month saw key political figures like Georges Danton lose their standing, and on July 27, 1793, Robespierre secured a spot on the Committee of Public Safety. Another pivotal moment was on August 23, 1793, when the National Convention decreed the levy en masse, mobilizing the entire French population for the war effort, detailing roles from young men fighting to elderly men, inspiring warriors, and preaching anti-monarchist sentiments. Then on September 5, based on a proposal by Barrère, the convention declared that terror is the order of the day. In that session, it was decided, with supports from figures like Chaumette and Danton, to form a revolutionary army of 6,000 men in Paris. This army, paid and equipped, was tasked with quelling counter-revolutionary activities, enforcing revolutionary laws, and ensuring the distribution and pricing of food as per the law of the general maximum. Robespierre, heavily influencing these decisions, emphasized that the power and determination of the Republic's supporters would crush any political dissent, marking a significant shift in France's military capabilities and showcasing Robespierre's growing influence as the president of the Committee of Public Safety since earlier July. On September 8, to fight the spread of fake currency and stop the flow of money abroad, banks and currency exchange offices closed their doors. Investing abroad could lead to a death sentence. The next day, radicals Collot d'Herbois and Billaud Varennes joined the Committee of Public Safety. On September 9, the government formed revolutionary armies to make sure farmers gave up the grain the government wanted. By September 17, the law of suspects was in place, allowing for the arrest of people on vague charges leading to overcrowded prisons. On September 29, the government started controlling the prices of more essential items and set wage limits. On October 10, it was declared that the government would stay revolutionary until there was peace. Marie Antoinette was executed on October 16. The trial of the Girondins began the same day, and they were executed by Charles-Henri Sanson on October 31, taking just over half an hour. Joseph Fouché and Collot d'Herbois put down Lyon's revolt against the National Convention, while Jean-Baptiste Carrier oversaw mass executions by drowning in Nantes. Tallien ran the guillotine in Bordeaux, and Barras and Fréron handled issues in Marseille and Toulon, with Joseph Le Bon being sent to the Somme and Pas-de-Calais regions. On November 8th, the head of the currency printing operation and Manon Roland were executed. The government closed the Paris Stock Exchange on November 13th and made trading in precious metals illegal, with severe penalties for breaking this law. Towards the end of 1793, there was a strong wave of actions against the church. Robespierre eventually called out those opposing the church as enemies of the country. In early December, Robespierre accused Georges Danton at the Jacobin Club of showing his bad side too often. Camille Desmoulins defended Danton and cautioned Robespierre against pushing the revolution too far. On December 5th, the law of Frimaire was passed by the National Convention, giving more power to the central government and making local administrations answer to the convention and its committees. Desmoulins suggested that the revolution should go back to its original principles from August 10, 1792, and proposed setting up a committee of grace. On December 8, Madame du Barry was executed. Etienne Clavière committed suicide upon learning he would face the Revolutionary Tribunal the next day. Thomas Paine was arrested and lost his convention seat because of his ties to the Girondins and his foreign nationality. By the end of 1793, two opposing groups emerged: the Hébertists, who wanted to increase the Reign of Terror's intensity, and the Dantonists, led by Danton, who argued for less severity. The Committee of Public Safety acted against both factions. On February 8, 1794, Jean-Baptiste Carrier was sent back from Nantes after someone informed Robespierre about the horrible acts happening there, though Carrier wasn't directly put on trial. Later, on February 26th and March 3rd of the same year, Saint-Just introduced laws aiming to take away the property of those who had fled or opposed the revolution. These laws are known as the Ventose Decrees. By March 1794, the leading members of the Hébertists were put on trial and executed by the 24th. On March 30th, following an unusual outburst from Saint-Just, the decision was made to arrest Danton and Desmoulins. They were tried from April 3rd to 5th and executed on April 5th. In the middle of April 1794, there was a move to centralize court investigations and round up political suspects from around France to face trial in Paris. Saint-Just and Lebas were dispatched to the Rhine army to keep an eye on generals and punish any officers accused of being too cautious or not proactive enough. The government also granted the two committees the authority to conduct immediate interrogations. A special police unit was set up within the Committee of Public Safety to keep tabs on government workers, creating a rivalry with both the Committee of General Security and the Committee of Public Safety itself. Foreigners were prohibited from traveling in France or attending Jacobin Club meetings. This included Dutch patriots who had escaped to France before 1790. On April 22nd, Malesherbes, who had defended the king, and Isaac-René Guy Le Chapelier and Jacques-Guillaume Touré, both of whom had been elected 4 times as president of the Constituent Assembly, were executed. Saint-Just and Lebas left Paris at month's end for the Northern Army. By May 21, 1794, it was decided by the revolutionary government that the terror would be centralized, meaning nearly all provincial tribunals were shut down, and trials were to be held in Paris. On May 20th, Robespierre signed an arrest warrant for Teresa Cabarrus, and on May 23rd, after someone tried to assassinate Collot d'Herbois, Cécile Renaud was arrested near Robespierre's place with 2 small knives and a set of clean clothes. She claimed the clean linen was in preparation for her execution. She was executed on June 17th. On the 10th of June, also known as 22nd Prairial in the French Revolutionary calendar, a significant law was introduced by Georges Couthon, referred to as the Law of 22nd Prairial. This law made the judicial process less complicated and resulted in the Revolutionary Tribunal working much faster. Following the introduction of this law, there was a noticeable increase in the number of executions, leading to a period now remembered as the Great Terror. Between the 10th of June and the 27th of July, 1,366 people were executed, which alarmed individuals like Collot d'Herbois, Fouché, and Tallien, especially since their past actions put them at risk. Just like others before them, including Brissot, Madame Roland, Pétion, Hébert, and Danton, Tallien was targeted for engaging in noticeable social activities. On the 18th of June, Pétion de Villeneuve and François Buzot decided to end their lives, and on the 21st, Joachim Violet was taken into custody. A significant victory occurred on the 26th of June, 1794, with the French army's win at the Battle of Fleurus. This win was critical in changing the course of France's military efforts and questioned the need for continued extreme measures and the credibility of the revolutionary government. In the early days of July, around 60 individuals were detained, labeled as enemies of the people and accused of conspiring against freedom. Paris experienced a surge in death sentences, leading to the creation of 2 additional mass graves at Picpus Cemetery by mid-July. There was a common concern among members of the parliamentary body regarding the dangers associated with their immunity, which had been in effect since the 1st of April, 1793. By the 14th of July, Robespierre had managed to expel Fouché. To avoid being arrested, about 50 deputies chose not to stay at their homes. Barrère shared his insights, highlighting that no one was under any illusion about Saint-Just potentially becoming a dictatorial leader and the threat he posed to others, including the possibility of execution. This led to decisive action being taken against him. Robespierre's downfall was the result of a unique coalition. On one side, there were those pushing for the Committee of Public Safety to have more influence and adopt policies even more radical than those Robespierre preferred. On the other, moderates were against the revolutionary government entirely. They united to use the law of the 22nd of Prairial, a law that made advocating terror a policy associated with Robespierre, seen as a convicted enemy of the Republic, which effectively endangered anyone supporting such measures. In the period between his arrest and execution, there's some speculation that Robespierre might have attempted to end his life by shooting himself since he sustained a bullet wound that severely damaged his jaw. However, the exact circumstances of this injury remain unclear. It's uncertain whether he shot himself or was shot by Charles-André Murda, a gendarme. The angle of the wound suggests a peculiar scenario if it were self-inflicted, as he would have had to be sitting down and shot from an unusual angle. Witnesses like Bourdon noted that in the chaos that erupted when the Municipal Hall of Paris was stormed, where Robespierre and his allies had sought refuge, Murda also accidentally shot Couthon's adjutant. Couthon himself was discovered at the bottom of a staircase, having apparently toppled over in the commotion. While Saint-Just surrendered quietly, Henriot attempted to flee via a hidden staircase to his apartment. The situation was chaotic, making it difficult to determine exactly how Robespierre was wounded. Locked in a room in the Hôtel de Ville, a group of conspirators numbering between 15 to 20 was captured. Ultimately, Robespierre was executed by guillotine the following day, alongside Saint-Just, Couthon, and his brother Augustin Robespierre. The day after Robespierre's execution, about half of the Paris Commune, totaling 70 members, was also executed by guillotine, marking a definitive turn in the revolution's tide. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.